Thank you very much, Jorge, for joining us. I'm here to assist as we get started on this talk today. So if you can just give us a brief introduction of your talk, and then we can get started. And thank you everyone for calling in, and yeah,
sure.
I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Karine. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for the delay. I think I have some technological glitches here. What I would like to do in this presentation is to introduce the phenomenon of shared external visions produced by San Pedro, as well as other plants, but in particular San Pedro in my experience, and explain why it has important implications for challenging scientific naturalism and materialism, and also for decolonial research programs. But before that, I would like to do a brief introduction to San Pedro. And these are, of course, the beautiful San Pedro cactus and the beautiful flowers. And San Pedro, as most of you already know, grows originally from the Andean mountains in countries such as Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Bolivia, and so forth. And so far, I think it is pretty safe to say that there has been like 3 different paradigms or historical waves of San Pedro use. The first one is like dated like 3,000 or 4,000 BC, or even more perhaps. There is some evidence of some San Pedro spores like in caves of 7,000 BC, suggesting that there were some rituals being done in those caves, even 7,000 BCE. And those rituals had to do with like connecting with ancestors, and also they were connected to bringing fertility, like invoking water. They were agricultural cultures. There is much more to say there, but I'll move to the second wave. And this is from the 17th century, perhaps earlier, up to the present, and this is what is called the curanderismo mestizo states. And this is like a more like model of like more a medical model in which like a person would come individually like to a curandero, to a healer, with a particular problem, normally like a physical illness or psychosomatic illness, and then normally the curandero would take San Pedro. Sometimes the client would take a bit of San Pedro as well, but mostly the curandero to open what was called the magic gaze that would allow the curandero to see energetically the problem and diagnose it. And normally there were things connected to other brujos, you know, and things that were coming into play in these situations in those times. And then the last stage is what we can call contemporary spiritual seeking and healing. And I would say that this is from the 20th century or upwards, 1980s, especially to the present. Here we have like a representative of the first stage, the famous painting of the Chavin culture, shaman, healer holding a San Pedro cactus. Is dated like 12 to 13,000 BCE. The second, this is like more like a curandero, traditional curandero in north coast of Peru, doing his healing, San Pedro in his left hand, and like they would also use a lot of like different perfumes and agua florida and many other things. And the third is like a picture that like probably more familiar to many of you or many of us, in which there is like a group of people coming together to do a ritual together. And this is these group rituals, I would say it's safe to say as well that they start in the 20th century. Normally like the curandero was like a more one-on-one sessions. And this is what has become really popular. Also what I've been offering for many years, like in California, in South America, and in Spain and other places. And a group of people come together, sometimes also with some kind of like physical maladies, but also many of them, they come just for spiritual growth and for spiritual seeking, for even spiritual enlightenment. So there is like in a way we could say like through these stages that there has been like a great diversification of the motivations why people would come to a San Pedro ceremony.
So Dr. Ferrer, can you please just share your presentation? We're not able to see it at this time. So.
Oh. How is that so? Can you see it now?
So no, just go to that screen share again, and we'll try it out. Thank you everyone for letting us know in the chat. And
sorry. What about now? Hold on.
So I'm
Can
going
you
to
see
go
it
ahead.
now?
I will just leave the screen and you can
Can you
to
see it
try
now?
again.
Can you see
Not
it
at
now?
this moment. No, let me try it.
Um,
Thanks everyone for being patient. Go ahead into that screen button at the bottom there and
Yes.
choose your.
I press the screen button. It's like not with the right thing. It's kind of.
Okay. One moment while we try to figure this out.
Do I need to do something in PowerPoint or just in the hopping?
Just in Hopin.
Yep. Oh, let me see. What about here? What about now?
There we go. Okay.
Can you see it now? Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Now. Okay, thank you everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you everyone, and sorry for the glitches. I feel I'm responsible. I'm very bad with technology, so sorry. Anyways, this is some of the San Pedro cactus. These are the 3 stages I mentioned before. This is the Chavin shaman holding the San Pedro cactus, representative of the first stage of the like archaic rituals. This is the second one that we already covered, like curandero mestizo, like 17th, 18th century up to the present. Still, they're around, especially in the north coast of Peru, as well as in other places. This is the contemporary spiritual seeking, 20th century, like as I mentioned before, groups of people coming together for a diverse, with diverse motivations, and but many of them, and this is new, I would say, this is really new of this stage, looking for a spiritual enlightenment, looking for spiritual growth, and this is something that did not belong to the prior stages. So I mentioned there was like this, there has been this diversification of like motivations of why people could drink San Pedro or participate in a ceremony. This is the different San Pedro preparations. This is like different stages in which San Pedro is being cooked. There are many different ways to cook San Pedro. Some people cook it for 7 hours, others for 20. The way I learned was it's a process of like 2 or 3 days of a lot of reductions and coming with different concentrations, but that's kind of like a particular way to cook it. There are many others. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can also see like the powders. And this is kind of like the green skin of the San Pedro, like in the sun, dried. In my experience, it doesn't produce the same effects. It's like, I would say it's like the full spirit of San Pedro spirit doesn't come through with only the powders. In the powders, normally it's like where all the mescaline is. So it's, of course, San Pedro is there. But for me, like in my experience, what I have seen in others, like it's by cooking like the plant with not only the green skin, but also some part of the white flesh, not the center of the cactus, but some part of the white flesh, where many different kind of alkaloids came together to mediate the spirit of San Pedro as it's understood in indigenous cultures. What I would like to say here is that for me, one of the San Pedro main lessons, and that's something I tell many people in ceremonies, is that in order to deeply grow and heal, you do not need to suffer. You can do this in the context of joy, love, community, and even celebration. And, and this is very important, especially in our Western culture, that it's a culture in which we have like kind of really learn, we have like this deeply seated conditioning that in order to grow psycho-spiritually, we need to suffer, you know, like Christ in the cross, and there's a tremendous baggage there about like suffering and spirituality. And that doesn't mean, of course, that there is not a time in our lives, you know, to face, you know, like the challenges and the shadow and psychosis and death and all the difficulties, you know. But also I feel that there is also a relation of our lives in which we do not need to go there anymore, that we can continue growing and healing in joy and love and community. And this is part of what San Pedro Main's lessons are. Each teacher plan has its own expertise, its own lessons, you know. I put here these Aldous Huxley citations, like rolling in the muck is not the best way to getting clean. So I think that it speaks loudly about what I feel some of the healing power of San Pedro is. This is San Pedro main effects or healing effects. One is this not the construction of the functional ego. So who you are in this moment, normally like right now, if you take San Pedro, is who you are going to be for the 10, 12, 15 hours that the journey unfolds. And this is why there are very rare bad trips, because bad trips normally correlate with a deconstruction of the functional ego that can lead both to the mystical, but also to psychosis and the fragmentation. There's also the sense of like magic and unconditional love. That's how I always, in a more minimalist way, I describe the effects. It's magic, the sense of magic, the reenchantment of the world, the reenchantment of nature and ourselves, and also tremendous unconditional love. There is also the gradual opening, and this is also why bad trips are rare. You know, it's more gradual. The body, our energy, our perception, our hearts, our consciousness gradually opens little by little, and there is a way in which that's much easier than navigates that other teacher plans that kind of like take you like very right away to a you know, like a different state of consciousness, and later you need to come back and integrate. Of course, healing, purification, and regeneration are some of the main effects. One really feel like regenerated after the San Pedro ceremony, like reconnected to life, reconnected to your higher purpose. And also the emergence of what I call a deeper self, you know, like, and this comes in the sense also with a sense of communion with the San Pedro spirit. In a way, sometimes with other teacher plans, like we can see in a vision the spirit, like with ayahuasca, we can see of ayahuasca. With San Pedro, more normally, it's like you feel San Pedro that inhabits you. San Pedro inhabits you. There's a communion with that spirit in a very energetic way, and through that communion, your deeper sense of self, who you are in, excuse me, who you are in your better self emerges. Communion with nature as well is one of the main also healing effects. And that's why most San Pedro ceremony happen during the day and also in nature, although there is also night ceremonies in the darkness, especially if you are training to offer San Pedro. And one of the reasons that San Pedro is so integrative is because it's what is called a jaguar medicine. It's a medicine that grounds you in the here and now, in your body, in nature. It's like you're fully here, and from this place you open yourself to what is beyond, you know, to the subtle dimensions of reality, to life and consciousness, but never leaving your body, never leaving your sense of like groundedness in this here and now. That could be psychic powers. I've experienced telekinesis in some cases, and also there is the phenomenon of the visions that could be also very healing. And this is going to be the focus of the rest of the presentation, especially the ones that are shared. And by shared visions, what I mean is like visions that are shared by more than one person. And I'm going to be focusing on external visions, visions that we see out there in the world. You know, this is a typology of hallucinations in which it could be like, you know, with your eyes closed, could be individual or could be shared. And then could be your eyes open, and those also could be individual or could be shared. And the ones that are shared are the focus of what I'm going to be saying from now on. I want to introduce scientific naturalism and its approach to entheogenic visions. The central assumption here is that of scientific naturalism is that all that exists is the spatio-temporal world that we see and science can measure. And this kind of like comes with two assumptions or corollaries. Materialism, all that truly exists is made of matter. And reductionism, the explanation of complex phenomena in terms of its simple constituents. So from this perspective, psychedelic visions can be seen or are seen by many scientists, mainstream scientists, as fully explained, appealing to neurobiological brain mechanism. But something that we need to be aware is that naturalism is not an empirical fact. Oops, I don't know what I did. Hold on. Yes, it's not an empirical fact, but a metaphysical supposition of science with some scientists defend science would no longer be science. So there is no empirical evidence that scientific naturalism is true. And most scientists and philosophers of science in particular would agree upon that. And the problem with naturalism and those assumptions is that it creates a blind spot for researchers, you know. So the bracketing of these supernormal claims, like, for example, non-physical entities or energies are part of the healing in a ceremony, far from warranting a neutrality, may actually constitute a bias against the possibility that people's experiences, people's healing are indeed impacted by those supernormal forces. And I think this is very important because there is today a lot of research about the healing power of many teacher plants and psychedelics, but most of these research are kind of like bracketing like the actual impact of this kind of more subtle factors, subtle dimensions. And I think that's like a huge blind spot that I hope we can correct in this conference altogether. So share external visions, like it's easy for many scientists to dismiss inner visions with your eyes closed or individual visions as subjective brain hallucinations, right? But what about shared external visions of non-physical subtle phenomena such as subtle energies, entities, or spirits that more than one people are seeing at the same time and sometimes for hours in a row? How does science explains that? Especially given that what we know about hallucinations, they would say they are hallucinations, but according to Oliver Sacks, one of the main researchers who wrote this wonderful book called Hallucinations, he said that the shareable nature of sensory claims is what distinguishes successful perception from hallucination. So it is when something is being shared, not just being seen by one person, that we will say this is real perception. And also whether in science or philosophy, like intersubjective agreement of different people about what we see, or consensual validation is considered the mark for objectivity or reality. So what we do with these shared external visions that we see sometimes, I'm going to be bringing different parts of evidence, or like, and the first one is from modern psychoanalytic evidence, Alex and Alison Gray, and their whole career started with shared visions in 1976 of the vista of interconnected fountains and drains flowing in a pattern that spread infinity in all directions. And for them, there was the most profound revelation that shaped all their work. This is some of Alex's paintings, of course, in which you can see some of those kind of like interconnected fountains and vortexes of energy. But there is also cross-cultural indigenous evidence. Many indigenous peoples widely claim that their medicines allow access to enhance sensory faculty, granting the direct perception of those subtle energies and entities, and these receive different names like the true seeing, Machigenga of southern Peru, second sight, the Tonga of Mozambique, stargazing, Navajo of North America. It's a pretty cross-cultural phenomenon that I believe is very relevant for what we're speaking here in this presentation. One also wants some ayahuasca evidence, in particular of the astral doctors. This is not a picture I took in the Maloca, of course. I took it from the internet, but I saw something quite similar. They were more fuzzy, something quite similar in an ayahuasca ceremony in total darkness, of like from the mouth of the ayahuasquero, there was like this light, and from that light to the other corner of that farther corner of the Maloca, and this kind of entities like a humanoid, taller than human beings, like but with arms and with legs, they would move in the room and would go one by one to the participants, like putting their hands in their heart chakra and lower chakras, like healing them. And when they arrived to my place and they did that, I felt a sense of like a surrendering to their benevolence. And when they put like their hands in my heart chakra and my lower chakra, I feel they were like really like adjusting with tremendous finesse, like certain dynamics of those centers. But the day after, when I talk with the shaman, I share my vision, and then he told me, oh yes, they came yesterday. They came yesterday. They don't come all the time, but sometimes they come, and yesterday they were here, so yes. So it was like this beginning for me of like this corroboration of like a vision that was in the external world that could be shared by more than one person. But for me, like, ayahuasca astral doctors, of course, are Westerns of uncertain, Western terms of uncertain origins. But again, different indigenous cultures, they do have different terms for them, like the sangarite, in the Machigenga, or in Peruvian vegetalismo, like my friend Luis Eduardo Luna described many types of helping spirits that are being seen in humanoid form. So there's anthropological evidence for what I saw in that Maloca that also was, I found it quite corroborating. For me, like the the most mind-blowing experience with San Pedro, because it was like a 2 hours shared vision event that I happened to call Harry Potter Meets the Matrix, in which I started seeing like red spider web like in the room, blue and green healing energies entering my body, tremendous healing. At some point, like I was in the ground, like surrendering to those energies and like feeling healed and like really like crying from gratitude. And I felt like two hands like pushing me up from the armpits. I thought it was the healer and another participant, but I saw them in front of me. I look right and left, and I see like this kind of like indigenous spirits kind of like bringing me up from the ground. We also saw auras in people's plants and objects, an energy vortex of various colors. But the wild thing, again, there was this was a ceremony with a healer and another participant. That was like her first time taking this medicine. And I had like my researcher's hat on, because San Pedro allows your fully cognitive faculties to really function really well. So I was like super curious if she, especially the young participant, was seeing the same things I was seeing, you know. And indeed, you know, I would point out to that part of the room what I was seeing, for example, these vortexes of like energy of particular colors, and I would, without describing what I was seeing, I would ask, what do you see there? Do you see anything there? And then she would describe them exactly in the way I was seeing them, the same colors, the same directions. We could sometimes even interact with these kind of spider webs of energy, and we could like touch them together. They were malleable, they were kind of responding to our contact. Also auras, of course, in the natural world, and also in people, of course. And again, there was like this kind of like a corroboration of between like 3 people doing 2 hours, like seeing, not only seeing, but also interacting with those energies like in different ways. So the standard scientific explanations for this, right? One is like that there are collective hallucinations, like you know, mass release hallucinations, like when people see like brilliant in the clouds, or what is called public hallucinations, like rainbows, mirages, water reflections, or also from a more neuroscientific perspective, there are what is called entopic phenomena. Entopic within the vision, what it means is like they are thinking that those images are brain generated by the drug ingestion, and the geometric patterns are determined by the architecture of the visual cortex and the form of the retinocortical map. Here is like some visions, some images of like mirages in the desert. Rainbows, I love rainbows, I'm sure you do too. Another beautiful rainbow here. And these are images of reflections in the water. So we're seeing things that they don't exist, but they're reflected. The problem here is that unlike the ayahuasca astral doctors, like beings in the cloud do not autonomously move, intentionally touch people, and tangibly alter a person's embodied experience. And unlike the San Pedro visions of energetic webs and vortices, rainbows and mirages neither respond to physical contact, nor do they persist when seen from different angles. So that doesn't work to explain the collective hallucination model, and I've studied quite it in depth, does not explain those San Pedro shared visions. What about the entopic explanations? We could say perhaps that the visual system cortex may mediate versus simply produce the perception of independent energetic dimensions of reality on the one hand. But the most important thing is that those geometrical patterns that we're also studying, like in the first stages of mescaline scientific research, you know, and they could account perhaps for some of the spider webs or some of like the geometrical patterns, but they cannot account for more elaborated shared visions, such as non-physical entities, spirit entities, or walls, and even less when they are interacting with you and you can feel their contact and they affect you in meaningful and healing ways. So I believe that this raises a very powerful challenge to scientific materialism, because scientific models fail to account for these shared visions, at least all of the ones I have studied, and I have studied many of them. It's a serious challenge to scientific materialism. So my question I bring in some of my talks is like, can we entertain the possibility of a multiverse, a vast multidimensional cosmos in which the physical world does not exhaust the possibilities of the real? And today, like in philosophy of science, and there is like an opening for all that. This is like Barry Stroud in his presidential address of the American Philosophical Association, what it is and what is not to be included in one's conception of nature. And then he was advocating for what I also advocate, like an open naturalism, an open naturalism that is not committed in advance to any particular and therefore potentially restrictive limiting conception of what exists, what is so. It's like an open epistemology, like an open cognitive stance. Something interesting about psychedelic research today is that for me it's kind of like sandwiched and limited by two forces. One is the scientific naturalism on the one hand, and there's kind of like what is called perennialist religionism, and the idea of perennialist is like there is only just one spiritual universe that can somehow be objectively known. In a way, we're kind of projecting like into spirituality, into the subtle worlds, our sense of what this world, natural world is about, something that we can get to know, exists independently from us, and we'll not get to know it. But the problem with this is that they both, perennialism and scientism, although in conflict with each other, because one is very religionist, spiritual, and the other is very kind of materialistic, scientistic, they are secret accomplices. They come to the same kind of constraining of possibilities, because they both kind of ideologically, without kind of evidence, commit psychedelic research and interpretations to a single metaphysical worldview. And this is important because having in many psychedelic conferences like MAPS, in which like major scientific researchers, like they tell us about their cosmologies, and for one of them is like non-dual and the other is more theistic. So each of them are kind of like, and many of them like they do endorse like, kind of like a universalist, perennialist view of what psychedelics can disclose. There is a historical background for psychedelic perennialists, from Aldous Huxley to Alan Watts to Houston Smith, Stanislav Grof, all of them pioneers, very important figures of psychedelic research, but all of them, they kind of endorse this kind of like perennialist metaphysics. We are not going to be able to get here for time into the many problems of this kind of perennialist worldview, but those of you who are interested can read my work, especially Revision in Transpersonal Theory, in which I kind of like analyze the problems of transpersonal perennialism. And also in my last book, I have a book on Stanislav Grof's work, also kind of like applying that constructive critique, that because I believe their work is so important, and I think it can really has even a greater relevance when we take off this kind of like perennialist lenses. So the implications for psychedelic research are important because free from scientific naturalism, we can be open to a multiverse, cosmos that is multidimensional, and this bridges the natural-supernatural gap. It's not just this natural world and this the supernatural. It's like these two dimensions. This comes from medieval times, like this split, and if we embrace something like a multiverse, something that many scientists are also talking about today in many different ways. We bridge that gap, and there is no split between the natural and the supernatural. It's all part of the same cosmos, but that has many dimensions to it, or many kind of like realms to it. And free from this kind of commitment, to a single metaphysical worldview, whether it's scientists or these religionists, like researchers can consider and explore with an open mind multiple metaphysical frameworks, and this can lead to extended science, science that is really guided by this open naturalism, and also to novel research programs. And I would like to give just one example of that, of what I call a decolonial participatory research program. And
Jorge,
this,
yes, interrupt for just a second. We've got another 15 minutes or so for questions. Yes. So I encourage you to make your final point, and then maybe we can bring some questions.
2 minutes, yes. So this is a program in which with indigenous healers and transpersonal psychologists, they would come together in symmetrical relationship, and then they would come together and they would prepare a journey. They would agree to contrast their external visions during and after the journey. They will intake the medicine and enter the group visionary journey. They will contrast their experiences in search for agreement. And they will contrast also the group inquiry outcomes with available Western and non-Western literature. And then they will try to validate this with different epistemologies, not only Western scientific, but also indigenous and from other places. This is the last important slide. This is the merits of decolonial extended science. It's an overcoming of scientists, it's an overcoming of Western ethnocentrism or epistemic narcissism, you know. It's an overcoming of patriarchy and white supremacy through inclusion of deep diversity of subcultures and gender, sexual, and racial. An overcoming of cognizantrism, the privileging of the analytical mind and ordinary states of consciousness as the arbiters of sound knowledge. So I leave you with a final word, Dagara perspective from my friend Malidoma Some, a shaman from Burkina Faso, that says, enlarging one's visions and abilities has nothing supernatural about it. Rather, it is natural to be a part of nature and to participate in a wider understanding of reality. Many thanks for your attention.
Jorge, thank you so much for your presentation. And of course, I wished we had a lot more time, but we do have some wonderful questions coming through. So I want to spend some time with some of these. So first, you talked a little bit about shared hallucinations. So we have a question about whether these shared hallucinations could be seen as a type of social fact, since they are collectively experienced. And if that's so, isn't that a more valid construct than speaking of these as hallucinations?
I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree in the sense that, like, I mean, everything that we engage together and we see together, they are social facts. They are kind of shaped by society. They're shaped by our conceptions. But at the same time, like when different people are seeing things that our society, our culture do not prepare us to see, or they have been telling us from day one that they don't exist, you know, and we see them as a group, that has like a power. That has like a power of a persuasive power that any individual private vision will never have. You will have the question like, oh, well, this is something I make up, you know, like in a dream, you know, but we know that people are seeing the same, you know. There's a social dimension, but I think there could be something else, and this is what those programs would try to find out.
Okay, so there's several questions along a similar vein on the idea of shared visions. So this is often described by psychonauts who have taken synthetic psychedelics like LSD, and the question is, how can we understand these types of experiences without sacred plants and spirits? And I'm sort of interpreting here, but I think the question is then looking the contrast between synthetics versus living plants and spirits associated with those.
Yes, well, my sense is that both synthetic and natural teacher plants can open those shared visions. And actually, the first one that I showed with Alex Gray and Alison Gray was kind of LSD based. So my sense is like I tend to endorse like this view of like the brain like as a funnel, you know, like a funnel theory of the brain in which like our brain is kind of like a really like conditioned through evolution to only see, you know, what is necessary for survival of the physical body. But these plants, whether they are synthetic or teaching plants, they really expand that vision. So potentially, I believe it's an hypothesis, of course. The hypothesis could be that those plants really allow us to see much more of that what exists out there, especially those energetic dimensions of reality that perhaps are not so foundational to live here and like prepare breakfast every morning and like take our kids to school, but there could be also very foundational for understanding the healing power of those substances on the one hand, and also foundational to understanding reality, like in its all its kind of multidimensional scope.
Right. So we also have some questions about San Pedro and traditional use. One of the questions has to do with the native uses of the plant. So we see kind of research now with psilocybin therapy and people taking one dose and having you know, a healing experience. So the question here is, do people need to have multiple sessions with San Pedro to see marked improvement in in mental health? And as a follow-up to that, do Indigenous people with traditions of using this plant tend to use it throughout their lifetime, or is it kind of in specific moments?
Yes, so it's a good question. I would say that it all depends on the person and depends on the condition and depends on what they are searching for. I've had people come into ceremonies in which like there's one particular session, they healed something, they opened their hearts in a particular way, they never felt the need to come back to another San Pedro ceremony, and I felt completely fine with that. And there are many other people that they would like study with me for years, and then they would start definitely a deepening process in their experience, but really depend on what they're coming for. And in terms of like traditional healers, of course, like the healers themselves would take San Pedro quite systematically because they would take them in ceremonies, you know. But with the clients, also it really depends on the paradigm. If it's a curanderismo paradigm, the curandero paradigm, sometimes one session would be enough, sometimes would be 2 or 3 sessions, sometimes even more. But in the paradigm of kind of a spiritual seeking, what you see today is like people do many sessions, you know, or they go back. It's also a beautiful experience of communion with nature, in which, especially after the stresses of everyday life, people kind of like get reconnected, regenerated to life, to their sense of purpose, and sometimes they go back. And after months of everyday life, they feel like they need to come back. But it really depends on the person, their motivation, and their condition, if there is something, a condition to heal.
Okay. Another question has to do with, there's some interest in understanding, since both San Pedro and peyote are both mescaline-containing cacti, there's some interest in what is the difference, and I'm interpreting a little bit, but I think probably they're looking at what is the difference pharmacologically, and what's the difference maybe in the experience or the effect of these different medicines.
Yes, San Pedro and peyote, they are considered like cousins to each other because their main psychoactive component is mescaline. The peyote buttons have more concentration of mescaline than San Pedro in general. There is some similarities in the effect in terms of like the opening the heart. There's an opening of the heart. There is a gradual dimension of the opening, so that's true. But on the other hand, like it's the buttons of peyote and the cactus of San Pedro, they have many other alkaloids. And this is important. This is not just a mescaline trip, you know. For those and these different alkaloids of each different plant, my sense, and this is also the emic understanding of indigenous cultures, is like mediates a different spirit, you know. Grandfather peyote is not grandfather San Pedro. No indigenous people would say that, you know, there are different spirits, there are different qualities, and for me, I'm biased because I'm a San Pedrista, and for me, San Pedro brings like this complete multidimensional experience that even though I've done a number of some peyote ceremonies, I haven't been able to achieve with peyote, but I recognize my bias completely. I know many people working with peyote and healing tremendously and achieving tremendous results, have a tremendous respect for that tradition as well.
Okay. We have one question. An individual says that she's seen offerings of wachuma being ground into powder in order to be accessible across borders. And this individual's interested in maybe some of your thoughts on microdosing with this medicine and subtleties that might be associated with that.
Yes. I cannot really speak first-hand experience here because my microdosing with San Pedro was very limited in time, was through a tincture, prepared tincture, and not with the powders, and was very limited in time, and I didn't get much out of it, but perhaps it was because I used it very little. I'm so much into like the full San Pedro brew. I like to cook, and the full San Pedro ceremony. So, but I have heard like positive results from other practitioners, but unfortunately I cannot give a first-hand informed experience to that question.
Okay. So let's see. One more question. We have maybe time for one, maybe one more after this, depending on
Sure.
This question asks whether you can speak a bit about the methodologies of the Chavin San Pedro use, particularly this individual's interested in the tunnels and chambers as channels of sound vibrations
Yes.
aimed at those who've partaken in the medicine.
Yes, it was a really complex system as far as I have researched, and you need to understand too that a lot of those understandings of those methodologies are rather speculative because they are based on archaeological evidence. But the sense of like people of anthropologists have researched that in depth is that by taking San Pedro and with the help of the ancestors, the shaman, the healer, you know, would go to connect with like this kind of like under the earth currents of water, and there were like different portals there. And by accessing those portals and doing certain things in these portals, in underground water, they would kind of be able to invoke the rain for fertility. That's kind of the shortest explanation. But again, I would caution that that again, like this is kind of speculative interpretations based on archaeological evidence. I mean, nobody really knows what these people were actually doing in reality, but that's kind of the consensus.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
Excellent.
This is a short one, and I think it may be based on sort of what people know about peyote as being fairly threatened in its limited range. But the question is whether San Pedro cactus is threatened or endangered.
And that's not my sense. That's not my sense. I'm aware of the dangers with peyote. It's like a big problem. With San Pedro, both what I have seen actually is like a widespread of cultivation of San Pedro, not only in South America, but also it has kind of course, it's been raised here in Ibiza, in Spain, where I'm speaking from. It's also in other parts of Europe, you know. So in a way, like it has really extended, you know. So I don't think that's like an actual danger. I don't think there's like an area of concern, although in certain areas in South America, in certain areas, there could be an issue. But definitively in the areas I'm familiar with in Sacred Valley of Peru and other places in South America, that has not been raised as an issue by anyone I've talked there with. And people are like growing their own San Pedros, they have their own production. It's kind of like pretty consistent, and they're like, you know, they're growing many of them, what is a great thing, I think.
Wonderful. Well, Jorge, thank you so much for your presentation and for your answer to these questions. And just as a final thought, people who are interested in your work, where can they find you? Where can they find out more about you?
Yes, thank you. I think the best way is have a website, and it's Jorge N. Ferrer @.com. So it's JORGE N like in Nancy, Ferrer, FERRER.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. A pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
I wish you all the best with the conference.
Oh, wonderful. I hope you get to see many great talks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope you all enjoy the conference as well as the other talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.